transition period, because if you take a developer from Kenya, let's say, and take him to a big company like Google, he's gonna, or he or she's gonna face that magnitude scale. Now, how is it for the opposite side of that?
That's good. It's a great question. I think for me it was there was definitely a lot of challenges in doing so, to go from like working in a place where I was supported by all these systems, supported by other people and so forth, to, well, I got a laptop and no one else in Djibouti is technical, so I had to sort of think, well, I think this would be a good idea, and go out and talk in the field, sort of talk with everyone, make sure it's the right idea, and build it all up from scratch. So I think in general it's pretty fun, because it felt like a fun way of doing things, to be a little different and doing one's own thing. But it also was a challenge too. It was a challenge because there would sometimes be things I didn't know how to do, and I didn't have a good person to turn to. I needed to learn about infrastructure. I needed to learn about how things work in Kenya. I needed to learn about how the specific thing worked with our loan officers, and learn about all that sort of stuff. But I think that was mostly a straightforward learning challenge. I think it was a little bit harder to work by myself. I hadn't been doing that for a while. Because I'm used to working with teams, And I think maybe the biggest difference in my experience is that big companies, even if they're like trying to not be too bureaucratic, they have rules about software engineering. In general, it's pretty good, but rules like code reviews, or like, do you know what code reviews are? Like code reviews, or like policy, like style guides for working with the language, or writing unit tests, all the stuff like that. Things that some developers, a lot of developers don't really want to do all the time, but it's good for an organization to do. When you're on your own, there's nobody telling you to do that stuff, right? Which is both a strength and a weakness. You can come up with your own ways and move really quickly, get something done. But it's also, you're sort of working without a framework, something to keep you honest and make sure that you're doing things the right way. So I think that felt like a change, to feel like there's no process around things.
So basically, did you get like other people, other developers to help you mantra, or did you just get any local help?
No, I just sort of did it. Partly because I think I didn't know as many people, but also because, all you guys have other things to do too, I think. And I wanted to, now that it's working, I wanted to see, hey, maybe other people are interested in using it. That was my hope, whether it's to help other MFIs or to help with this framework that I think could help in similar sort of situations. But yeah, I talk to people about it. But I think sort of sometimes it's not always. It can be good if you have like a working version before you try to get people to help, right? Because otherwise they're like, well, you're just full of ideas, I haven't seen it happen yet.
In the last about 48 hours, the last couple of days, there's been an outage on Amazon EC2, which has raised a lot of questions on how reliable cloud services are. How does Google or App Engine address some of these concerns, bearing in mind that Amazon has?
It's a good question. There's a lot of different ways to look at that. There's like the question of what should we be thinking of as a world, or as developers, right? Is it bad if too many people are depending on a single system or a single option that people are using, a single point of failure? So I think that's one thing definitely to think about, and that's a concern. I don't necessarily have all the answers there, and I think probably the best thing for everyone is to think about that more. I think a lot of times what's unfortunate is that, with Amazon's outage, I don't know exactly what happened. I didn't read the news. Of course, I don't work there. I don't know. But a lot of times what happens is they have a failure in one data center or one availability region, and people don't build their apps to run in multiple availability regions. So it goes out and they blame Amazon. In fact, it's their fault. Amazon said this was going to happen, and then it did happen, and now they're complaining. And at the same time, it's like if you gave someone a car and you said it's going to fall apart, and the wheels are going to shoot off some point in a few days from, a few months from now, and then they drove it. It's their fault for driving it when that happens, but it's also a problem, right? You put them in a tough situation about a problem that's going to happen once in a while, but be catastrophic. The real answer, I think, for the specific reliability is people should do the right thing. I think in the long term, if people were dissatisfied with Amazon, there's still tons of other options out there. So I don't think that's in my mind, I'm not worried about the future of the internet anyway. Obviously, one option, of course, is App Engine too, but there's other great ones too. There's Heroku, there's just other hosting providers, a lot of things out there. I think another way of looking at it, though, is that, from that point of view, talking about availability zones and so forth, App Engine, we've had our share of problems too. We've had outages as well in the past. But something that we've tried to do, and I'm cautiously optimistic that we've gotten even better at, is that because we manage your code, that means we make your code run in multiple data centers. You don't do anything. It's pretty hard getting an app to run in multiple data centers, get the data synchronized. You deploy an App Engine, it just works. You don't need to know anything about that. And so we're trying to make that even more reliable. It's always been that way since the start. And so that means when we have an outage, we can switch to another data center transparently on you. Sometimes that can still involve delays or there's things we haven't anticipated. But we've recently introduced the high availability, the high replication, option on App Engine. And that one actually pairs closely with the data, so it switches automatically if there's ever any problem detected. And that's a pretty advanced system, I think. I'm pretty proud to be able to offer it. It does add a little complexity to your application. I think not too much. It changes how you work with data a little bit. But literally, you could send one request and that fiber could be cut, that data center could lose all power, something catastrophic could happen, and the next request will have your data and be served from a different geographic region without you having to change how you program. So I think that's a cool thing App Engine does. On the larger sense of things, a little bit, I think we need to be careful because all of these systems offer new things. But as you try to solve these problems of reliability, they get complicated. Some of us are trying to make it easier to work with them. But the most important thing, I think, for all of us as engineers to be aware of is to know what you're getting into, be careful about it, do the right thing, and also realize there are other options. I don't think it's time to worry about there just being one option. As compelling as Amazon is, compelling as App Engine is, there's still traditional hosting, a lot of other options around too.
Things are changing really fast. Do you have a tip to stay up to date?
So things are changing really fast. What was the second part?
Do you have any kind of tips for people to stay current?
I don't know, man. The world's changing really fast. I don't know if you mean in general. I don't know, stay sharp, pay attention. But I don't know. I think everything does change really quickly, but I think always being open to new stuff and reaching your own opinion of what you think is better or worse, I think is important, rather than just signing on to the new thing. And maybe I think something that's important, at least from the engineering point of view, is to look to productivity in a holistic sense. In almost every engineering endeavor or organization, the most important and the most expensive thing in any of those endeavors is the engineers themselves. The same way that I found that the MFI I was working at, it was the loan officers. I needed to make them more productive if I wanted to make our whole MFI more efficient. The same thing is true about engineering. Often for a software startup, the biggest expense is the engineer's time. So finding holistic ways, really pragmatic ways where you are more productive. And not just that you can get something built more quickly, but that you can maintain it in the longer period better, that it actually makes you more efficient. Those are things, I guess, to watch for. There's going to be all different things. I don't know what they'll be in the future. But I think that's probably the best lens, the best filter to look at things through when you're assessing whether it makes more sense. At the same time, a lot of things aren't broken either, and so there's no need to necessarily change them if they're working well for you.
Have you worked with a remote team? And if you have, what tools would you recommend? And also, if you're working with a fairly young group, still new, say online or in programming, what would you advise?
So you said in working with a large team, what things was there?
Remote team.
Oh, remote team. That's a good question. I have a remote team for the App Engine team that works in Australia. And of course, I'm normally in California. It's actually a really big time zone difference. I think it's 14 hours. And so it seems close. That's because none of us walk across the Pacific, right? And so it's actually really tough because they're across the date line. So it's a whole different day. And it is a challenge. I think what I found works with working with remote teams, particularly, and large teams, is to give them autonomy. But that's easy to say, right? Well, autonomy is great for everyone. What I found works is to give them self-contained projects. So say App Engine. App Engine is composed of a lot of projects internally to do a lot of different things. Say that you take one feature, like our task queue API. It's a system for running a lot of tasks in the background. That's a feature within App Engine that's composed of a number of engineers working on it. It's pretty self-contained, and I can say that as someone who knows a lot about the system. It interfaces with the rest of the system, but hopefully in a pretty minor way, but it needs a lot of work done on it. And so that's an example of something that the team in Australia has worked on. What I found works really well is if when you have remote teams, you don't try to have them try to work like right alongside your teams in another area on the same code, because that just isn't going to work out. Everyone gets angrier and angrier, as the delays get longer, they don't understand each other, the emails get more combative, it doesn't work well. But instead, if you give them their own thing, where you all agree initially on a specification, we want this thing to work, it needs to work this way, here's how it's going to plug into this, and they go and build it. You've cut down the amount of communication that needs to happen, right? Because you agree on the high level, and then you don't care about the details anymore, and they work on that self-contained part. I find that works well, because then it works well from the two engineering teams seem happy, they seem productive. And as a manager, it makes sense because the only thing that I would check in on, or our manager in Australia would check in on is, hey, what's the progress on that? How close is it to done? And then, maybe we want it to be done sooner, or maybe it was done ahead of schedule. But it's not producing like interpersonal friction between teams, you know what I mean? Or delaying other efforts as much because it's its own independent effort. Does that make sense?
Let's say one team or an individual is a bit experienced, so they know how to go about, and they still are fairly young team or individuals.
Yeah.
Would they still want the same platform and still achieve the
Even if you're saying they're less experienced, I think they can, and that can work well. It needs an attitude adjustment by the more experienced person sometimes. And that's why I think like sort of giving people self-contained projects works. Because let's say like, if you and I were to work on the same piece of code that I'm very familiar with, which means by definition, you're probably not going to be as familiar with because we just got started working together. I may not be the most pleasant person to work with, right? Because I'm going to be a know-it-all about it, right? And whatever you do, you're going to do wrong. And that's not because you're any better or worse than anyone else. It's because that's my thing, and I feel a sense of possession about it, and I know everything about it. So that's actually a character flaw on my part. And it's something that everyone has, though. Do you know what I mean? It's something that is very common. So I think the best thing is that if everyone can acknowledge that, and you understand that, give other teams new areas to work in where they develop their own expertise and become the experts on that area. Even if that takes longer, and if that isn't what's immediately needed. If someone is trying to do something different, they're actually, probably in my opinion, in most cases, wasting their own time. Because I've seen this happen before, where let's say it's something I'm very, very familiar with, right? And then I ask you to work on it, but you need my approval to do everything. I will never be satisfied with what you do, right? I'll always be correcting it, I'll always be complaining, it doesn't work out well. So I think in that case, the options are, you don't work on it. You work on your own thing, your own project. Or I transfer that project to you and I have to give up the ability to be in charge of it. You have to become in charge of it. Does that make sense? And it's partly about breaking things into components. I think maybe what I found to be the most successful thing in engineering, and it's hard to do, and I think people don't spend enough time on it, is to take a big project and try to find all the small sub-projects you can, and give them names, give them clear dividing lines, make it clear that they're separate. Because often those lines exist within software, but people don't think about them enough. When you think about them, I think it makes it easier to have teams work together and to give people autonomy, to give them control, and to make it formal, the process of saying, yes, I built up this piece of software, but in 3 months, you're going to be in charge of it. So my job is to train you, and then you'll be in charge, and I don't have say anymore. The more that you can see how things are different projects and components, the more that's possible. So I think it can be a hard thing to do. It's especially hard if the person who's remote is in charge and is too busy and isn't paying attention, that sucks. But I think that That's the model I've seen work well. And I think, if you're trying to manage upward, to try to inform someone about that, that can be very challenging. Maybe having a good amount of time face to face with them to try to ask for something like that and to try to talk about it at a high level rather than the specifics. Most people are reasonable at a high level. They're just unreasonable about specifics. Do you know what I mean? Like, we might well agree that something is a good idea, but how we're going to do that thing, we might disagree, right? And so it's good to get an agreement at the high level rather before you start arguing on the low level. So maybe trying to start from there might be a good way to go about it.
How do you keep your motivation up?
How do I keep motivation up? That's a good question. I think what I have found maybe, this is probably different for every team, but the engineers on my team all work too hard. And it's true, they come and they stay really late, they work all the time, they're really passionate about what they do. On a high level, I try to keep motivation up by not having them deal with stupid things. They don't have to go to BS meetings, they don't have to deal with stupid details. I try to take care of those as much as possible because that's what makes me happy when I'm doing engineering, right? I don't want interruptions or stupid meetings. I want to code, I want to get stuff done. But I think beyond that, what I found helps for motivation is to remember the engineers, often their tendency is to work too hard, which can make them feel isolated, even without knowing it. And to have some social functions that feel natural. Like my app engine team in San Francisco, we all go out for lunch every Friday, but we go as a team. Although we have Google has cafeterias, so usually we eat there. But then I try to say, no, let's go outside of the building. Let's go out in San Francisco and have lunch together. It gets everyone out of their mindset a little bit, and it gives us a good chance to talk and to be motivated. I mean, I think some of the key things for motivation are feeling like a team is a family, that you care about your coworkers, that you enjoy working with them, that you're happy to work with them. And so finding a way to reach that feeling, I think that's something that really can keep motivation up.
Your comments?
He's asking if you'll provide your contact information.
Oh yeah, my contact. Oh sure, yeah. It's just Gibbs, KGIBBS @gmail. So yeah, I'm happy to. I don't have it written down anywhere, but yeah, you're welcome to contact me.
There's an issue on Google App Engine of naked URL domains.
Of URL space on App Engine.
Precisely.
Sure. Which?
Initially it was there, but then because of security, it was kind of removed. Are there any plans to kind of provide naked domain URLs in future, simply because sometimes upload doesn't look kind of professional to certain people out there?
Yeah. So in URL space, do you mean after the domain that there are certain things you couldn't use?
So instead of having whatever it is about appspot.com, you actually have your, let's say, ecopapa.com.
Yeah. So yeah, you
have to go to the setting, put www, then you have to do
yeah.
direct, I think.
So you can use your do that. You have to station team in San Francisco. We all go out for lunch every Friday, but we go as a team. Although we have Google has cafeterias, so usually we eat there. But then I try to say, no, let's go outside of the building. Let's go out in San Francisco and have lunch together. It gets everyone out of their mindset a little bit, and it gives us a good chance to talk and to be motivated. I mean, I think the key things for